Hi friends, it's the Redeemer of Mankind. Today I'm coming to you so that I can talk about the title, The Redeemer of Mankind. Because it always provokes mixed reactions and feelings. Every time I mention the title of who I am, the Redeemer of Mankind, you always get people looking at you in a very skewed manner and wondering, who is the Redeemer? What does the Redeemer redeem us from? You would understand that this is a title that is given to someone who has been called by the collective consciousness of humanity. That's why he's called the Redeemer of Mankind. He doesn't come, out of his own accord or, free will. He is summoned or is called by the consciousness, the collective consciousness of the human soul. This happens, in after time has lapsed and humanity has deteriorated into basically a state where they need someone to come and bring a light to them so that they can basically find themselves. You see, most people, they just view themselves from a one-dimensional point of view. They fail to realize that a human being is an entity which consists of three dimensions, which are the soul, which is the originator, and then the body, and then the latter is the ego, the mind. The soul comes from everlasting, from everlasting to everlasting, meaning that it's eternal. It's an energy. When you see the flesh or the body moving up and down, it simply means the soul is existence in there. There is energy, and then the mind is from the senses that are basically attached to their body, the senses that accumulate information from the world. That's why I say that the mind is formed, consists of all the accumulations of worldly knowledge, worldly material things, the perception of self, and then all those kind of things. They form what we call the intellect, or they form what we call the ego. So my work or my mission when I am called is to remind souls who they really are, to remind them that they are traveling through time. They've come to stop in the flesh, to experience themselves, in the flesh. But now the issue comes when souls get attached and they forget where they come from and their soul purpose. I'm gonna touch on the issue of the purpose of the soul. The purpose of the soul is not to come and dwell in the flesh and accumulate the things of the world and become egotistic. The soul does the will of the Creator, the will of God. So the only yearning or the only goal of the soul is to rise up, so that it can go back and form part of the whole with the Creator. That's the purpose of the soul. For a human soul to find rest, it needs to ascend to the regions of light, which is where the spirit of life or the spark comes from. So when you are birthed here on the earth, there is always a reason for that. And then from there onwards, when you exit the flesh, there is somewhere where you will go. I'm going to touch on that as well, because I need people to understand when I say I am the Redeemer of Mankind, what do I actually mean? Because people have had their own traditions, they've had their own systems or they've bowed to systems that they found here on earth, and they followed lies and falsehood. You know, the souls have been covered by the ignorance that is brought upon by over-cultivation of the intellect or the mind or the ego. So what I need to bring to you, it's understanding so that you can break free from the cycle of suffering or being held, you know, hostage, you know, by the ego in the physical environment. Because remember, if your ego grows so big, you know, as it does so, and it begins to detach itself from, you know, the counsel of the soul, then it incurs death for the soul. So when the soul exits the flesh and it goes on, it passes on to another dimension, it still carries those debts that were incurred when the three dimensions of the mind, the body, and the soul were together. So, and those debts, they burden the soul so that it does not rise. Instead of rising, the soul now descends into the regions of darkness. And the regions of darkness, you know, are a very uncomfortable environment, because they were never actually designed for the souls of mankind to descend there. So while they are there, they reach a point where, you know, the conditions of that environment forces the soul to begin yearning for the truth, or to begin yearning for the light, you know, because remember that the soul's purpose, or the goal of the soul, is to rise up to the regions of light. So when they are burdened by this debts that were incurred through the ego, and they go to the dungeons, I call the place the dungeons because it's a terrible place, and then they begin to yearn, then they are ready to rise up to the next level, until they reach a point where they would accept any conditions for them to be birthed again, you know, into the physical environment, so that they can learn to stay away from the burdens that are brought by the ego. So, but then remember, when you are born pure. Very, very few people reach a point where they begin to remember, you know, who they really are. That's why I have come, is because it has become so difficult due to the environment where people or the souls find themselves. It has become so difficult for them to remember quickly, you know, who they are and their goal and where they're supposed to be. So that's why the cycle, you know, keeps on repeating, meaning that the soul is birthed in, you know, on the earth, and it accepts the conditions, and through those conditions it fails to rise up when it exits again the flesh. It has incurred death again, therefore the cycle keeps on going. So the suffering keeps on going. So the Redeemer brings knowledge and awareness and awakening of the soul, so that now the soul is aware. Because the minute you begin to be aware, that's the beginning of your ascension, meaning that now you are rising. Because now you are aware that I am a soul that is traveling through time. I'm going to tell you, you've got to know that the body itself, it's a crude entity, or when the soul is in the body, it's basically sort of like in prison, because the body has got its demands, or the needs, and then along the way, you know, comes the mind. Remember, when a child is born pure, with the body and the soul, and then the mind enters the pure being through the senses. And then as it is exposed to those stimuli in that environment. And then the accumulation of knowledge and intellect and tradition and all these sorts of things, ultimately weigh down the soul. That's why the teacher, the Christ, in the olden days when he came, he said that my burden is lighter, so take my burden because it's lighter, meaning that get understanding that I bring to you. Therefore, you will become lighter as well as a soul, meaning that you won't be weighed down by all these accumulations. That's why he gave examples of people who are rich, that it will be difficult for a rich person to enter heaven. What that basically means is that rich in the sense of not just material accumulation, just even over cultivation of intellect is rich. Just being proud, it's rich, it's considered rich. So when a soul or when a person reaches that state where they are rich in knowledge and rich in material things, it becomes difficult for them to rise up, meaning that to ascend to the regions of light. They are so overburdened, by what they know and what they have, that it becomes difficult for the soul to rise up. So when they die, then they are weighed down by their burdens into the regions of darkness or the dungeons, where they must face hardship, extreme hardship. I have given people example of the bottomless pit. It's an environment where there is no way you can rest your feet. It's the darkest darkness and the loneliest loneliness. And people often think that these are forms of punishment that God imposes on those who don't believe. I tell people that you've got to be very cautious. You've got to be very careful, because your words and your beliefs, and your convictions, they create this environment. For example, if you believe that there is no God, your very convictions and your very words and your thoughts, they weigh down your soul to such an extent that when you exit the flesh, your soul goes to that environment where there is no God, so that you can be in that environment, experience what your words have created for you, so that you can get to feel what it's like to be in an environment where there is absolutely no God. So when you sit in that environment where there is the loneliest loneliness, and there is the darkest darkness, and it's claustrophobic, and there is nowhere to rest your feet, then as time passes or as moments lapses, then you begin to yearn for a pinhead of light. You see, when that situation happens, when you begin to yearn, when you begin to preoccupy yourself with that pinhead of light, that you look up and you say, only if I can have a pinhead of light, then you are considered mature to rise to the next level, until you accept the conditions of your birthing. There are those who are basically have reached a level where they can see things that are happening in the world, meaning that they can see their dead relatives, so to speak. They can see people moving up and down, people who got an opportunity to repent, people who got an opportunity to say, let me know God. Let me know basically what is it that God wants me to do as a soul. What is it that I need to do as a soul so that I can be lighter and ascend to the regions of light when I exit the flesh. These souls or these individuals can see the people here on earth, and they have worked so hard to prove that they are ready to be born in the flesh again, so that they can go into the flesh and begin to serve the truth. But remember, when you accept these conditions and you are born into the flesh, you don't really have prior memory, of where you come from and basically what you need to do. You are given a condition of your birth on the earth, and you accept it. Say, for example, you can be given a condition to be born in a very impoverished family or impoverished society, so that you can be humble through the poverty, or you can be birthed in a very, very wealthy family, so that you can experience what it's like to be rich, and then be able to show your compassion towards those who lack, because you basically come from the same environment, or you are basically one, meaning that you are all related. So that's where people, go wrong, because they don't realize how related they are. They don't realize that the next person that they're looking down upon, or the next group of people that they're looking down upon, one of them could be actually directly linked to them. What I have come to do is to remind people, to make them wake up and realize that they need to wake up before it's too late. They need to begin to look at each other and realize that these are traveling souls. And then when they see and behold the next human being, they are basically beholding a temple that is a house in the spirit of life, which comes from the Almighty. And then the sole purpose of that soul, or the goal of that soul, is to be reunited with the Maker, or to ascend to the regions of light where it finds rest. So my goal, or my work, is to remind souls, is to remind you of who you are, and where you come from, and where you need to be. You see, there are two channels where energy is channeled. There is the path of love, or the path of fear. So most of the time when somebody, due to maybe previous experience, when somebody comes and speaks like the way I do, and says I am the Redeemer of mankind, there arise misunderstandings and prior opinions, and you see people have formulated the images in their heads of how the Redeemer or the Messiah is going to look like. And therefore, that preconceptions or pre-made opinions, they are the ones that ultimately do a disservice to the people, because now the people becomes servant, to these filters. I call them filters because your ego filters information, your prior knowledge, or your environment or society is one of the filters. Your traditions, when you are born, there is a tradition that is basically followed in that environment or that family. That is also a filter. And all these things, they work so hard so that the message that I carry or that I bring does not reach the soul. Remember, it's the body, the mind, which is the ego, which consists of the ego, and then is the soul. So my teachings and the message that I bring to you must go through these crude things which are called the body. If your ears don't hear properly, that is a filter. And then your ego, due to what you were taught when you were growing up, becomes a secondary filter that filters the messages and the teachings before they reach through the soul. My goal of speaking at this point in time is to reach to the soul, so that the soul can awaken and begin to remember that it's traveling through time, and there is a goal which is to ascend to the regions of light. Therefore, the cycle of suffering for humanity will come to an end. Remember, your soul speaks the language of consciousness. The same like babies when they are just born, they speak the language of consciousness. So therefore, when you begin to remember, you can actually even remember the language of consciousness. And all of creation, or things that are created, animals and trees and all these other things, the earth itself, it speaks the language of consciousness. You can begin now to communicate with all these other creations through the language of consciousness, because that is your language. That is the language that the soul speaks. My coming and this message is to you, is to remind you of who you are, so that you can begin to be aware and begin to basically remember the soul does the will of God, whether your intellect tells you the otherwise. But your soul is the one that remains, because your soul cannot be destroyed. Your soul is energy, so it cannot be destroyed. So when you begin a journey through the earth and you accumulate knowledge and things, and you begin to convict yourself that maybe there is no God or there is no maker, your soul is horrified, you see, because it knows that you are incurring the worst kind of debt, that it's so heavy that it's going to push the soul further down into the regions of darkness, that you cannot escape once you exit the flesh. So my coming here is for you to be reminded of who you are. I know that it's so easy to be deceived by the things of the world, by your intellect, what you know, the accumulation of knowledge, the accumulation of material things, and you start using these crude senses and to look at yourself and the environment and look down upon other souls and think you're better. Remember, these souls, they've accepted their conditions, and then now they are suffering to complete basically their debt, to repay their debt, so that they can begin to be lighter and ascend to the regions of light. So basically the Redeemer comes to remind you of who you are, so that the soul now, once it knows who it is and how it relates to the environment and other souls around it, it can begin to work towards the ascension. That awareness simply says that you are ready. You see, me speaking like this and you hearing me and knowing internally that indeed this is what I've been waiting for, the yearning that most souls are experiencing, it's just a confirmation that this is what they've been waiting for, and now they are ready basically to ascend. And should their soul pass on once or after hearing this message, that soul will rise up to the regions of light and break the cycle of suffering. My dear friends, I am grateful that I have this opportunity to talk to you, and I hope that you understand and you open your heart to the knowledge, so that your soul from now on can rise up and reach to those regions, to the highest of highs. Thank you, and stay tuned.